Karen Okonkwo is the co-founder of Tonal. Tonal is a company that is striving to transform this stagnant idea of stock photography by displaying images of diverse people and their diverse stories. Jeff and Staple Design have really done everything from clothing collections to retail spaces to creative agency work, and collaborated with companies like Nike, Microsoft, Sony, LVMH. So I wanted to start by asking you two whether you see yourselves as parts of movements, moving towards pushing standards forward in your different industries.
Yeah, absolutely. For Tonal, the reason why we started to embark on Tonal was because we started to recognize that a lot of people of different ethnic backgrounds were being portrayed in negative lights, irrespective of just pictures. And, for us, we just decided that it made sense for us to find a way to enter into that conversation the best way that we could. Can we walk into news stations and beg them to share the real stories of these victims? No, we didn't have that sort of control. But what we could control are the people out there who are currently not being represented with their ethnic backgrounds. And so we decided, of course, to start Tonal to be able to push the envelope of really sharing the real stories of people. So we definitely feel like we've been a part of the movement of real imagery that is relatable and really tells a true story about people.
Jeff?
Yeah, I think for sure. The motto for Staple is a positive social contagion. So it's all about people believing in themselves, moving forward, spreading that like a contagion. That's why we named it that. And for me, it's more about like creative independent thinking. So I think 20 years ago when I started, it was very like, it was the norm to just sort of like get a 9-to-5 and, get a bachelor's and a master's, especially being Asian, and sort of going out and doing your own thing based on something that you are just passionate about. Like 20 years ago was very rare, and now it's become the norm. And I'd like to think that, that part of that culture I've helped sort of flourish. And then the other one is also sort of like a race, people of color thing. I think the route that I took was very like much more subversive and quiet about it. Probably also due to the times as well. Like I couldn't come out and be like, this is an Asian-owned brand and we're gonna kill it. Like that just wouldn't have vibed with people, But my thing was like, I'm gonna build a brand that is so dope that people can't neglect it. And then when they dig deeper on like who made it, they'll be like, oh wow, it's a person of color made it. And that was the strategy that I took. So it's sort of twofold for Staple.
Yeah, I can see you nodding. Is that kind of similar to the way you position Tonal, or? Yeah,
because it's just kind of weird timing, because we did not launch Tonal because there was this huge attention on diversity. It's almost like Tonal came out and all of a sudden the floodgates of diversity started happening in different forms of media. And we really were just being authentic and recognized something in that moment in our community, irrespective of what was starting to trend. So I totally resonate, and when it comes to that, just being yourself, letting it happen naturally, and people start to hear who you are.
Yeah, both of you have kind of started talking about seeing other people do similar things, and that was my next question is, how have you seen the movements you're part of gain momentum or lose momentum?
Well, it's really black and white evident for my culture, because when I started, there was about 20 stores in the entire world that supported what's known as street culture, right? And the other thing that was indicative was that, like, even when I was, I was raised and grew up in New York City, even as I was like walking around, and if I was wearing a brand that was like a street culture brand and you saw another person, you would be like, yo, what up? You know that brand? Wow. And you dap it up and have a conversation. Like, can you imagine if you did that with everyone that wore a Supreme hat today? Like, it'd be crazy. And now you look at, like, this week was ComplexCon, which is now like, a multi-billion-dollar industry, like, so it's definitely, I've seen the change dramatically of like being a niche culture to being something that's mainstream.
Yeah. And to be honest, when it came to Tonal and stock photography, let me actually just educate the crowd too, because some people don't know what stock photography is. And it's basically all of the corny, homogeneous, very stale images that you see on Google. And what happened was I didn't see us whenever I was searching very basic things: girl drinking coffee, boy driving. it was scary to me that in order for me to even find, say, an African American, I had to type in African American boy. But aren't all boys different ethnic backgrounds? And so in doing our market research, yes, there were other brands who were out there who were trying to combat having more racially diverse imagery online. And it just was a matter of how they did it, though, that made it different for us. And I still believe that we positioned ourselves in a different light because of the way that we did our marketing.
That reminds me of the same thing when Jeff was talking about ComplexCon, because momentum can be positive or negative depending on your perspective. And I'm wondering if you see people who maybe on the surface say they are doing what you are doing, but you can see a difference in how you approach it and what they are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it draws a lot to like the political atmosphere that's happening now too, where like people are joining teams and they're like drawing lines in the sand, and it's ComplexCon is a great example of how success can also like sort of damage your whole entire culture, and I think too with your business, I know it's sort of starting out, but I could see how like people there's like a famous saying that people say like if it wasn't for like Obama, Trump would never make it into office. It's because of Obama that we have Trump. And it could be like, it's because of Tonal that people are like, the people who think like you, it's like, yes, it's good. But there's people like, yeah, wait, why are there colored people on stock photography? Like, there should be none. Like, there's, and then like, they go harder the other way. You know what I mean? Yeah.
That's true. I think that what we've namely experienced is how much we maneuver unconsciously. And what I mean by that is I was just talking to you backstage, and he was like, wow, Karen, I went online and I looked at Tonal, and it didn't even occur to me until I went to Tonal that I've been looking at life racially one-sided, because we've all been conditioned to see the world as white. And so I do believe that what is happening is that people's eyes are starting to open, and they're starting to take more accountability with the spaces with which they maneuver. It doesn't make sense for you to live here in America, understanding how racially diverse we are, to only have one set of people in the office, one set of people being pushed in the movies, one set of people being pushed in the magazines. And so what we found is a rise in accountability from all walks of life when it comes to showcasing more diverse people.
I mean, what you're talking about imagery is really true in streetwear and fashion, too. The kind of imagery associated with that can also cause people to have unconscious maneuvers. Have you experienced that? Or
all the time. I mean, my business is predominantly like made up of people of color, and I always get asked that question, like, do you deliberately hire people of color? And it's like, you would never walk into like IBM and be like, do you deliberately hire Caucasians? Like, so like, why are you asking me that question? But I get the flip side. I get the exact flip side where like sort of trade publications in fashion will be like, why are there so many Asians in streetwear? I was like, I don't know. I'm not doing a tally at home. Like, there's Bobby Hundreds, one more for us. I don't know. I don't think about it. But you obviously are thinking about it a lot.
Right.
so how do you respond to people? You just
I
do you tell them that about the IBM
I
thing? It's like I
don't count. I'm sorry. I don't have the breakdown. But like, I'm not keeping track, really.
Well, one thing to move on a little bit, Karen, you said in a previous interview that it's important to you to know your why. And I just wanted to crib that question directly and ask you guys what your whys are.
So I can answer that personally, and my why actually seeps into everything that I do. And my why is to continue to be someone who is providing for others who are underserved. And I recognized that when I was a very little girl. I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and I don't know if any of you guys have been to downtown Phoenix back in the day, but there was a lot of homeless people on the street, and I just knew in my heart that the empathy that I had for them was different than others. And you know what, sometimes, just like you were saying, we're conditioned, I'm Nigerian American, and we're conditioned to go to school, get good grades, and get into a good job, that we start to kind of defer and suppress our true authentic selves. And I had a really big aha moment in 2014 when I went to Oprah's Life You Want tour. And it was this huge stadium of thousands of people, and somehow she had the power to quiet that room and force everyone to write down what your why was. And it brought me to tears because I had been living this corporate America life, living the good life financially, was living in a good city. And it just, in that moment, I said, you're not living your true purpose. And so that really is my why, is to care for others, to serve on them. And I do that through Tonal because there are people who have literally come up to us in tears saying, wow, I actually get to see myself now. And it sounds so simple and trivial and weird, and like most people are like, well, no one has thought of this before? But no, because if they had, you wouldn't have received such a reaction. We wouldn't receive such a reaction. And so my why, again, is to serve the underserved.
That's deep. I'm sorry. I mean, like my why. I think there's two different questions there, because one is like, what's your why from a business owner standpoint, and the whys there are obviously like increase revenues and decreased, like expenses and stuff.
Yeah.
But
No,
I
that's
think
real.
my real why is like how I can make myself happy every day, and I know that comes off sounding very selfish, but what I learned a long time ago was that if I'm not first happy, like about myself and about my being, then it's scientifically incapable for you to then make others happy. So you have to work on yourself first. And Dave, the previous speaker, was getting into it when he started talking about politics and like voting and stuff like that, and Trump. And it's like, yeah, like we get it. There's a lot of problems in the world, and like you can try to solve those problems. But if you have problems like here in your home that you can't solve, you have zero chance of solving any other problem outside of that. So
Yeah.
I go about this mantra where like every day I wake up and it's like, am I doing something that makes me happy? And literally, like if a doctor said to me like, Jeff, you have 1 week to live, I'd be totally fine. And that's like a
Right.
barometer. Like how many people in the
Yes.
audience, if a doctor told you you had 1 week to live, would you be freaking the fuck out? Or would you
Yeah.
be like taking care of your personal matters and like saying to yourself, like if a doctor said you have 1 week to live and you quit your job, you should quit your job right now.
Yeah. I
Dead
agree.
ass, right? Like,
Yeah.
why waste your time? Because that could happen.
Yeah.
If a doctor told me I died, I'd be like, cool. Like, I've done enough. I've seen enough. I'm very content and happy. So
Yeah.
that's the barometer that you should live by, I think.
And I don't know if you guys have heard of Simon Sinek, but he has a book. It's called Start With Why.
It was mentioned earlier this
It
morning,
was?
actually.
Man,
Yeah.
that should be affirmation for you, because I wasn't here earlier, so I didn't know that was said.
Yeah, it
And I
is.
don't know what was mentioned, but Simon really loves to reference Apple a lot throughout the book, Apple. And he said that the reason why Apple became so successful was because they did not focus on the fact that they have computers and devices. They focused on why. They focused on the people, and they never took their eyes off of the people and who they were serving, and the way that they market is in that fashion, which has made them, the largest, computer and telephone company in the world.
It's the largest company, period.
Largest
bigger
company,
than
period.
oil now.
What about Walmart?
No, bigger.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
for sure.
okay.
It's bigger than Exxon now.
Wow. God bless Apple. They're the pillar, so you can't even hate on them because they knew their why. Plain
Right.
and simple.
And I mean, your why, even though you said it's about knowing that I'm happy today in every moment, it is also fuel for pointing outwards.
Exactly.
It's not just, that's the end game, right?
That's a secondary thing. And I mean, Karen put it really greatly, like about what her why is. And, I was just sort of just going zooming out or zooming in one more, where it's like, yeah, you have to take care of yourself, and then you could do everything else.
Right. I mean, also because the first question I asked you guys was about being innovators in a movement, and that requires sustaining yourself first. You mentioned being Nigerian American, and Jeff, I know that you grew up in New York, being parts of different kinds of communities and subcultures. And so both of you have these backgrounds that have made you really natural bridges between people. Like you're very fluid in a way. So I wanted to ask you, what makes that possible? How are you so good at connecting or being a part of any group you find yourself in?
Racism.
Go for it, go for it.
That's why I'm
Continue.
so fluid, because the first 18 years of my life, I was shamed of being Asian. I was shamed by my family because I wasn't the proper Asian, but I was also shamed by my schoolmates and my community because I was different than them, right? So it was like, and I mean, literally, like racial slurs were like an everyday thing for me growing up in New Jersey, and not in a negative way, which I know sounds weird, but like, it's like, I'd shoot like, yo, Chink, that was a great 3-pointer. It's like, oh, thanks. It was like it was just normal for them. It wasn't like they were like, trying to belittle me. It was just vernacular. And it wasn't until I went to New York, for New York University, where I stopped hearing daily racial slurs, that I was like, oh, wow, this is like, it's different. And I'm seeing people, like what you said, the power of seeing your reflection, right? It's like, it's amazing. And so that, I think the reason why I can sort of flow back and forth between the different cultures and niches is because how I dealt with, I had to deal with those things every day. So I big up racism a lot.
Yeah, your environment really plays into that. And for me, as a Nigerian American, the first thing before we were taught anything, it was, you need to be the best. So B's are bad. I remember like it was like a movie. I ran home, I had all these B's and all these A's. I thought it was so cool. I showed my dad, and he was like, he just looked at me, he's like, B's are bad.
B is for bad.
I was like, the other kid got C's and D's, but okay. So the standard was already set really high to quote unquote be the best. And so, in being the best, you maneuver in spaces, and you start to realize that it's gonna take more than just like on the books to be the best person. To be the best person is also how you treat people. And I learned very quickly that raising your voice at people, being highly offended easily, didn't go well. And I'm not saying that you don't deserve to be offended by the way that people speak, but I always taught myself that use it as an educational moment. You truly do not know where people are at. You just don't. And I'll say, and unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but because I grew up in a predominantly Caucasian, white, and Mexican neighborhood, no, somebody corrected me, they're like, you're just being nice saying Caucasian, say white. I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
White
you took it to heart.
And Hispanic community, I felt like I wanted to understand everyone. That was always my way of doing it, and I ended up being in student council where there was different ethnic backgrounds there and people of different walks of life, and I just love to connect with them and understand their stories. And so I just don't think you get very far staying in your little bubble. Oh, excuse me, this is what I was going to say before, is that I found that people who have stayed within the same race, ethnic background, same, and then they get shot into a different world, they just crumble.
Yeah, they can't
and I
handle
watch it. I watch it happen. And they maybe misread certain situations, and it's really sad because I'm like, if your parents would have done better, if you would have done better to just exert yourself into different groups, you would know how to speak to people differently. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I just forced myself to get to know people.
And just the flip side of that story too is like I had the pleasure of early on in my career being able to go to Japan a lot. And I remember the first time I went out there, I was so excited because think about it, like I grew up in like rural New Jersey, then went to New York and assimilated with more of like my people, whatever that means, right? But then when I was like going to Japan for the first time, I was like so stoked because I was like, yo, this is like the motherland of my people, only to find out that there's another set of racism out in Japan where it's like, yo, my brother's like, no, you Chinese, like you ain't us, you know what I mean? And there's like I was like, wow, there's even racism out here too, you know? So it's like learning how to navigate even amongst like your own skin color. And I'm sure it's the same with like, if you go from Nigeria to another neighboring country, I'm sure it's like, oh no, you Nigerian, like, yeah, I know about you, like.
We always say that we're the best.
We're the best, I know, the same with the Japanese, they are the best.
Yeah, well, do you find yourself shape-shifting in different spaces?
I don't shape-shift in terms of race, I shape-shift like in terms of culture.
Okay.
So like, I know the difference when I'm talking to like a graffiti artist versus like a COO or CMO, and I think part of my success is being a translator to that. Like, vice versa, if you talk down to a graffiti artist about like, money and ROI and KPIs and stuff, they're gonna go mute. Whereas if you talk to the CMO about like keeping it real and like stay true to yourself, they're gonna be like, stop wasting my time. So you wanna achieve both of those goals, and like the successful person is gonna be able to like act as the mediator between those two worlds.
No, I think that's definitely being able to speak two kinds of languages as well,
Yeah,
or maybe
yeah.
multiple kinds of languages. And I imagine you must have that same experience with photographers and then maybe Getty and Shutterstock or big companies that you have to work with.
Yeah, Joshua Kissy is my business partner, and we joke and say that he's the right brain, I'm the left brain. And so we obviously, there's we cross over because I am a creative as well, and he is very business savvy. And so I'm really, this actually doing tonal has really helped me have different levels of patience and have different levels of communication when I am communicating with other creatives, because a lot of creatives don't have that business acumen. So there's certain things that the mark is missed. And I had to quickly learn and realize that, okay, they create, like this is their end all be all, this is what they look at 100% of the time. So let's speak in a way to them that they can absorb, but also not to make them feel, bad or like they are missing out on any details. So yeah, there's, like you said, there's different ways to maneuver when you're doing business. You can't just straight talk to a lot of people.
Yeah, you also can't talk down, right, to people like, you can't talk to an artist and be like, you just keep drawing pictures. Like, you can't do that too.
And what Karen's saying reminds me of Business of Hype. Actually, almost sounded like you described the show that you do and the reason why you do that show.
Oh, really?
To me, at least. Maybe you can correct me, because that intention of talking to creatives about the nature of
the reality. I mean, the podcast Business of Hype is really about like, a lot of people just say like, follow your dreams, listen to your passion, and you'll be successful. Like, sure, that's the first step, but like, that's the 1 yard line. You know what I mean? Right. So like, I'm trying to talk to creatives in an open, honest environment where like, tell me what the 99 other yards were for you to get to that touchdown. Like, really, the realities of it. And I think I'm poised in a unique position because I think when I interview people, they don't feel like I'm an investigative journalist trying to get at like their numbers and their secrets. It's just really like a heart to heart. And so a lot of the gems that come out of that podcast are like really, really incredible. Like shit you've never heard. Like you've heard these people speak, but you've never heard them say this type of stuff. And I think that's why people resonate with it.
If there are existing standards right now in imagery, in diversity and inclusion, in streetwear and fashion, what do you want the new standards to be?
Well, when it comes to stock photography, currently, or at least when we entered last year, the standard was throw any images out there. Most people who do stock photography are just trying to make a quick buck. So that was one of the first things we noticed, is that the images were just all over the place. So what would be ideal is that everyone held a standard at a minimum of just showcasing more different people. And it's not even just about race or ethnic background. I mean like people of different sexual preferences, people of different abilities, people who are breaking down stereotypes of gender roles. Like, these are the things that we need to see. And currently, we don't see them. So the standard needs to be that we are actually showcasing what the world looks like. And, obviously, we're doing that now. And so it's to our benefit that our competitors are not really doing it very well. But there's the piece of the pie, there's enough for everybody to be able to tackle that.
Right,
so.
Because the intention is not just for companies to be applying those ideas, but for all of us to have that expectation.
Absolutely, yeah. Everybody has the expectation of being more intentional about diversity, really. And it's plain and simple. It's getting out of your comfort zone, getting out of your space of the same faces you see every single day, and actually genuinely trying to understand your neighbor.
I think my future intention is to have a day where the creator is sitting at a conference table and he or she carries as much weight as the CEO. And I think we're slowly making headway, but I remember in my lifetime where the designer or the creative director was seen in the same lens as like the dude who works at Kinko's. Like, yeah, you print that out for me, you're the designer, Or it's like, even my mom, to be honest, like she doesn't understand what a designer does. Like, I showed her a magazine that I designed and she was like, oh, did you write all the articles? I was like, no. She's like, you took all the photos? I was like, no. Oh, you printed everything? I was like, no. She's like, I don't understand what you did.
Oh.
Like, you didn't do anything.
What would it take for her to get it, do you think?
It'll take like a Chinese newspaper to define what a graphic designer is. I don't know, but like, to believe it. But no, and I think it's getting there. I think actually you mentioned Apple. I think Apple had a lot to do with putting weight on design and aesthetic as like a thing of importance. I think 99% of the people that buy Apple products probably don't understand like beveled edges or like the golden ratio or like kerning. They don't understand that stuff, but they know inherently that when they pick up this thing versus a Dell, like something feels better about it. They can't articulate it, right? And I think now they're like, even though this costs $200 more, I'm putting my money behind this because it makes me feel better. That is design. And I think executives are like starting to understand that. So when you have a conference room and you're sitting there with like CEO, CMO, head of finance, and designer used to be like the gimp in that room, like meaningless, like go do this. But now I think we're raising our voices and starting to have like, more of a position of power. And that's that's what I've been pushing for, And that doesn't just go for graphic designers or product designers, but even musicians. Like you look at musicians now versus before, where it was like the dream was like get signed, get a record contract, But now it's like you look at people like Chance the Rapper or Frank Ocean. It's like fuck a contract. Like I'm doing this on my own, and you could see the difference in a career when you do it on your own, Or even like a Jay-Z who's doing it like not only on a lyrical level but on a more of an executive like corporate level. And like one of my favorite lines that Jay-Z said really early on is he said like, I'm doing this for what they did to the Cold Crush. And what he meant was like, and this is why I do it. I do it because I remember the days where like people shitted on creatives, and I'm doing this for what they did to the Cold Crush. So you will see one day.
Well, what you said about Apple products making people more aware of design made me think about how actually what you do at Tonal is not just about diversity, but also elevating stock photography as an entity, because definitely stock photography is like the basis of memes, unfortunately, and is generally considered really corny. So it's also about educating people that can be well designed too.
Yeah, because we want it to be universal and we wanted to adapt to the times. And what I mean by that is, I personally would never put a stock photo on my Instagram or it is not aesthetically pleasing. And so when we were thinking about our filter, we were like, how viral could we get this photo? Not just using it in a presentation in the boardroom or using it in an article you're writing, but actually putting it on your feed and using it. We wanted to see that. And we do see that because of how careful we were about how we take the images and then, of course, how we filter them.
That's a cool barometer. It's got to
yeah.
be good enough for your feed.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something for us to aspire to. You guys talked about looking into the future, standards you'd like to see. I was wondering, what can we, day to day, in all of our positions, do something to work towards that?
When it comes to diversity, or?
Well, you both sort of looked into the future. Mm-hmm. You want this expectation for diversity in imagery across the board in all channels. And then Jeff, you're talking about, designer having equal status, with CEOs. There's everyone at the table, no matter what the role is, has a voice that is worth the same weight. And both of you are leaders and entrepreneurs and moving things forward, but not everyone in this room has that same opportunity, but can still do something, right?
Yeah, you guys can be liaisons. I mean, not to have a shameless plug, but in knowing that Tonal is a vessel for diverse imagery, that's where everyone should go for their images. And so when you do that, you have no idea how powerful that becomes. Because then what's happening is that you're shifting the way that visually your corporation or your small business, you're shifting the way that you're being seen internally and externally. I had a friend who started a group for the food and design field in Seattle. And I was looking at her feed, and I know her personally, and I know that she's not racist. I know that she doesn't have any, sort of biases against anyone, but her feed did not show that. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, one day somebody's going to call her out on it, because we live in a world now where people are holding others accountable. Sure enough, I get a long text message from her, basically, and you can tell that she's crying in what she's saying, and she's like, look at what someone said to me. It was an Asian woman saying something like, wow, your page is so white. And she was mortified. And she was like, Karen, what do I do? I'm not racist. I can't even believe she would say this to me. And I said, it's as simple as switching up your imagery. When you're taking these photos, and not even just being fake about the photos, but actually in real life, going out and finding quote unquote influencers. I know we hate that word, but for this purpose, finding people who are influencers in their community and saying, hey, I would love to treat you to, coffee, tea, food. Would you be open to taking some images? Because I want people to know that I'm open to seeing different people of different ethnic backgrounds and within my community. I even had a photographer do that. She said, Karen, I need to build my portfolio. Please, can I take photos of you? You can have them for free. Just because somebody called her out on it. So what we all can do is be really intentional about where we find our imagery and how we push it.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because I don't know where everyone is at in their individual lives. But I would say, like, overarchingly, I go back to, making yourself happy first and foremost. And you don't have to achieve, like, your own business for 20 years. Like, there's no shame in anything. Like, I don't care if you work at a coffee shop. Like, everyone here sort of, like, is partaking in, like, commerce, right? And when you go into, I don't care if it's like a Walgreens or a Starbucks or if you're in an Uber, you immediately inherently know the difference between someone who loves their job and someone who hates their job, right? And sometimes I'm like, I'll talk to the Uber guy and I'm like, you obviously hate you're being an asshole to me, but you hate your job. Just quit your job, or like, anything, So it's like, I remember I say Uber because I was talking to my accountant recently, and he was like, you need to be careful with your expenditures, which that's his job to say. But he's like, what happens if, like, one day you lose it all and you end up, driving an Uber? I said, I'll be a millionaire Uber driver because I'll be the best damn Uber driver in the world. Like, I'll figure out how to flip that and, like, turn it into something amazing, because it just comes down to, like, having pride in your craft, no matter what your craft is. So I don't think we're sitting here saying, like, go out and start your own business and stuff like that. No, just, like, have pride in what it is that you do,
Yeah, and to that point, one of the things I think that works well for Josh and I is that we don't try to be more than what we are. So Josh is very much a creative. I'm very much on the marketing and business development side of things. And so we go together like bread and butter. So if there are people out there who really want to stick to their own craft, I don't think it's a bad idea to align yourself with someone who may be more suited for business. And of course, you can decide that on paper, what that looks like in terms of equity and, what type of responsibilities you hold. But sometimes to stay true to yourself, it means giving up the thing that you're not that great at. And so that's an angle that I think that a lot of creatives can go, is they can hire someone like me. Or
well, that's
partner with
great.
someone like
It's
me.
great advice, because just last week, this kid came up to me at ComplexCon and he was like, Jeff, I want to ask you a question. I'm in finance. I work on Wall Street, but I love what you guys do. I want to be part of your world. Like, how do I make the transition from, like, finance in my world to, like, your world? I was like, what? Do finance in my world. Like, that's how you do it. Like, we all don't know what the fuck we're doing with money. So, like, get a job in your favorite brand in the finance department. And, like, I would have thought that was, like, the most easiest advice, but you could see it clicked in his head. He's like, of course, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's something both of you seem to be talking about, is self-awareness,
Yeah.
being really aware of what's going on in your feed or going on in your life, right? Just
Yeah.
asking yourself.
I think he got so enamored with the idea of, like, how do I, like, design a shoe? How can me, who's, like, just doing accounting, design a shoe? It's like, you can get there, like, in 2 pivots, like, yeah. But he was just so fixated on this one goal. I think social media has a lot to do with that, like, fixation on this, like, fake goal,
I was wondering, actually, I'm glad you brought up social media again, because you mentioned your friend's feed, and I was thinking about the role that accountability has in the kinds of identities we craft, or the sort of ideas that we perpetuate. Do you see that who you are is a result of other people keeping you accountable in certain ways, or that you want to hold other people accountable?
It's tricky because I don't take my personal social media that seriously. What I mean is I, like, stick to the same filter aesthetically, but I'm not like, worried about, I wonder if this is on brand with Tonal, and I wonder if this is on brand with my marketing business. And, I just stay true to me outside of that. But unfortunately and fortunately, we do live in a world now where every move you make, so long as you are on a social media platform, you are going to be held accountable for. And so there are certain things that maybe that I say amongst my friends, I maybe not be so ready to share online. I am very vocal. I will admit that. I don't usually hold back much. But I do think that we do hold a responsibility of backing up at least the things that we are vocal about. So if I'm saying that I'm vocal about certain, political issues, probably should see that demonstrated on my social media, because then it's like, where's the alignment there? So there's a balance that goes into that, and ultimately, I do think that we are all to be held accountable for whatever we put out there.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's, everyone knows about the pros and cons of social media. I personally keep it very separate from my personal life. I try to do a job of, and I apologize to anyone who follows me, but like I try to create an illusion that like you are seeing my life, but actually you're seeing about 10% of my real life when you see social media.
Well, the secret is out now.
Yeah, I don't care. But because I still value the act of breaking bread. A lot of like, some of my friends are like, we sit down and have dinner and they're like, man, I feel like I don't have to talk to you about anything because I see it all on social media. I was like, no, you don't see shit. Like we could actually still have a real conversation right now because I'm not expressing some of the things, So it's like, and that's good and bad, like for instance, this week with Election Day, like everyone was like, I voted for this, I support this, and I didn't say anything, and people were asking me to, but I keep my personal views separate from my brand, and that's it's one of those deliberate choices that someone has to make,
Yeah.
Twitter is where it goes down, though.
Twitter.
So now we know. Same for you?
I mean,
Twitter is the real me.
Josh got me all in Twitter. I wasn't all on Twitter. I'm a long words person, not a short characters person, and
They have threads
I've seen
now.
it getting people in trouble. So.
Yes.
Okay, so if we want the real deal for both of you, follow you on Twitter,
Yeah.
not Instagram. Got it. So I am moving to Q&A from this audience in front
Great.
of us. Give me 1 second. Okay. Do you think, this one's for Karen, do you think Tonal would have had the same immediate success if it had started a few years in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is, I don't know. Because,
Valid answer.
yeah, only because the reaction that I've gotten from most people is that they didn't even realize that this was an issue, even though we know that diversity is trending now. And so I don't know, but I would like to think that it would have had the same sort of trajectory, because people's eyes are open when you show them the facts. It is as simple as me telling you to take your phone out right now and go to Google, go to images, and just type in kissing. And then tell me what you see. It's right there in front of you. So, but I will say that it has lent itself really nicely that we have been a part of the movement of diversity and inclusion and, all of the other movements, which is namely holding people accountable. So I think that it's lent itself really well, but I don't know. I don't know if it would have had the same,
Totally valid.
yeah.
One for Jeff. What role do you think tech and the Internet of Things will play in the future of fashion?
A lot. I think within 10 years, it's going to totally change the face of it. I just saw something on, you should look at it, it's on Mashable, which is like that blog, but like it's a woman wearing a dress and it's just changing like color and pattern. It's e-paper made as a dress. And like that's even like so 1.0, but like, 3D printed cotton and threads, and Google's working on this thing called Jacquard, which we've actually had the opportunity to collaborate on, which is like thread that like is connected to your devices. So in the future, I actually think, fashion, like starting a fashion brand is probably like a really bad idea to go into as a business, because within our lifetime, you will just be able to like print out or make in your house what it is that you want to wear. It won't be like you have to go to a store and buy it anymore, And that even goes for like the highest of high like couture designers. Like if you're a big fan of like Balenciaga, you will now just end up buying a Balenciaga 3D printing machine in your house, and you'll just print out your favorite Balenciaga shirt every day.
What happens to the role of a designer then?
Yeah, it's done. That's why you shouldn't go into fashion. Yeah.
Sorry to crush your dreams.
Someone still has to make the initial, CAD that gets printed out. So that person will be like still important.
Got it.
Yeah, there still has to be an edit.
Actually, I want to apply that same question to you, Karen. Have you seen tonal be shaped in specific ways because of technology and the future of technology as you see it?
Well, a lot of people, well, I'd say a few people have come up to us asking us if we wanted to create some sort of facial recognition so that it automatically will file our images in accordance to visually what someone looks like, which is kind of cool.
Also kind of scary.
Yeah, it is actually. It was really interesting, and it was very early on when we started Tonal, so we were just kind of like, okay, that's a cool idea. You know, not really interested right now, but I recently spoke at Dreamforce, which is Salesforce's huge event that they have every year in San Francisco, and I started to realize that just AI is going to take over the world. So if you're not creating your businesses in such a way that implements artificial intelligence, you're going to be behind. And so we started to think, okay, what are ways that we can implement AI when you come to our site? An example, like a very basic example of AI is just remembering your username and password, you know? But how cool would it be if you had a certain habit of buying certain types of images on our site? And then all of a sudden you get on there and it's like, hi, Lisa, here's a compilation of all of these images that we think you would like because this is, you know, you can match that sort of buying pattern. So I think that it's going to definitely be important for us to align with the trends that are happening in technology. And I don't know if you guys have heard of the Future Consumer Report. It's by WGSN did it and basically said that by 2040, I believe it's going to be no longer called e-commerce, it's going to be called m-commerce, meaning that everything, every little thing that you do is going to be based through your phone. And so how are you going to shift your business so that it is more mobile friendly? And that's the questions that we've been asking ourselves, which is the conversation I was having back in the meeting that we were having as I was walking on stage.
That might still be ongoing
that
right now.
might actually still be
They're waiting
on.
for you to answer.
So,
But
yeah.
that
anyway.
reminds me of a good question for Jeff because you're working on physical spaces still. How does the rise of m-commerce affect that?
I think there's always going to be like an anti to whatever the major trend is happening. You know, so if you look at like music right now, you know, like vinyl sales are at the highest they've ever been. You know what I mean? And like book publishing is now coming back. So there's always going to be like this antithesis to what's sort of going on. So as AI starts to really take over and like, you know, you walk in, you just don't even walk in the store, but like you just shop all from your phone. I think the idea of like walking into a community center space is going to be even more valuable and people will pay for that. Like my friend Jan Chipchase has always said, like, today you pay to plug in, tomorrow you're going to pay to unplug. Like you're going to have to pay a premium to unplug from the Internet of Things. You know, like once Elon Musk has his whole auto driving thing done and everyone's in a self-automated vehicle, people are going to pay top dollar to drive a car on a racetrack so that they can feel what an engine feels like and they could actually play again, you know? So it's always going to be like this anti, I think. So I think it's good. We'll be fine.
Right.
And I think the role of an editor will still be really key, like a human editor.
Right.
Yeah.
So even with the inclusion of AI, your consumers' information, they would still want to rely on a human editor to pick photos in the future.
She said no.
No, just the AI.
Maybe, yeah. I think that no matter what, you're always going to need that human interaction. We'll always have that high above anything else. Even though I know we're the generation of wanted it yesterday, there's nothing that compares to a human interaction. So we'll always find a way to continue to implement that. And that really is a part of our ethos too, which is storytelling. You can't storytell through a robot. So we'll still be around.
I got into the biggest argument with the creative director of Instagram about the sort of like curated, you know, by Instagram role versus like the algorithm versus the chronology. And, you know, they were like, his whole thing was like, it's the same stack of photos. We're just telling you like which ones you should see first, and then you'll still get to the ones that, you know, you'll get to at the end. And I was like, I know, but I don't even want my wife to tell me which photos I should look at first. Like, I want to decide, right? Yeah. And what inevitably happens is, I'm sure this has happened to everyone, where it's like, you'll catch up with a friend, and, you know, you'll be like, I haven't seen you post in a while. It's like, no, I still post. And then you look at their feed, and you're like, holy shit, I missed like 12 posts because Mark Zuckerberg decided I didn't want to see those posts.
Right.
You know, and I think that element is like, we really need to like check that. I mean, sure, the programming might get better and they might be more fine-tuned, but I want to be able to have my finger on it and decide too.
Okay. That's actually all we have time for right now, but
All
thank
right.
you both so
Thank
much
you.
for this
Wow, that was
conversation.
really fast. Thank you.
Big hand
Thank
to
you so
both of
much.
you. Oh, I think.
Thanks, everyone.